Hi, and welcome to Sparkle Tart.
And welcome to another episode of the Kissing Class. And today we're going to upcycle some Prima paper flowers. So I don't know about you, but I have a rather large collection of paper flowers from Prima, Wild Orchid Crafts and I Am Roses, and I love them all. Now, without a doubt, I always end up with some flowers that I just don't use. So I'm going to make these a little bit more customized. So just gently separate the layers. Now, sometimes the glue's a bit harder than others, but that's okay. So the first thing you might like to do is change the size of the petals. Whilst you can't really make them bigger, not with this step, you can make them smaller. This one, a little bit larger than I might like. So what I'm going to do is use this smaller flower as a guide. And yes, I can hear you screaming. And I'm just going to trim the petals of those two larger layers down to the same size. Once the larger layers of petals have been trimmed, take the scissors and, you guessed it, trim that top layer with the gorgeous beads on it down to the size you'd like. Okay, now even if that's all you've done, you now have a different looking flower to the one we started with. So we've made the red flower smaller. Why not make the cream flower bigger? Okay, so you may have noticed I've got some ribbon scraps and some paper scraps here. Can you guess where I'm going with this? I'm going to trace around this slightly larger petal. See how that's a little bit bigger? How easy is this, guys? And yes, you can pretty much do it with any paper and any ribbon. The only thing you'll need to worry about is the ribbon may fray slightly. Now, the easiest way to do this is to just trace around a slightly larger flower. If you don't have one of these, you can trace around the size flower petals that you actually do have and then just cut it so that it looks a little bit larger. Once you've traced the flower onto your paper or ribbon, simply neatly cut this out with a pair of scissors. If it turns out to be a little too large, trim it down. If it's too small, save it and use it for another flower. Fantastic. All right, now I'm going to do another layer of that vintage paper. And this time I'm going to make it the same size as the little flower here. And I might just use black. And I'm just going to trim that out. Now, I know that the pen I've used is water soluble, so I'm just going to get my little water brush here. And I'm going to make those pen lines bleed. This will give the petal an edge and make it stand out a bit more, and also a little bit of sort of variation in tone. So I'm going to do this with both of those petals, layers of petals I've created, just so that they have a little bit of variation from the cream layers. So now our little cream paper flower is larger than it started and has a few more layers of interest. I love how easy it is to customize these, and depending on the paper or ribbon or fabric you use, you get completely different looks, all with the same flower and the same idea. But now it's time to make it so that you can see some of this a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do is just spritz this with a little bit of water. And I'm just going to shape these petals. So what I'm doing is I've got one finger underneath and I'm just pinching this petal and squeezing it towards the middle. So one finger underneath, pinch and squeeze towards the middle. And I'm just doing this the whole way around. Now, doing this while wet means that whatever shape you've made it into will be about the shape it stays in when it dries. Now I'm just going to do the same thing with the next layer down, because when I layer this I want to be able to see the petals of the flowers underneath. And see how this shows those petals underneath a whole lot better? So I'm just going to leave this sitting there and let it dry. Now you can also make layers out of either ribbon scraps, material, taffeta, lace, organza, anything you've got on hand. If you're using ribbon scraps, some of them will be the perfect size, and you can either just cut the shape of the flower out, or if you're worried about your ribbon fraying, simply cut a circular shape, which I often do. And this makes it really easy to get the flower shapes and the layers. And the circle is a little bit different to the petal layer, so it adds another element of interest. When cutting your ribbon and your shapes, you can either make it the same size as the flower petal layer above, slightly larger, or slightly smaller, depending on what you're aiming for and the look that you'd like to achieve. I often make it slightly larger so it peeks out from behind. So I've got one small circle. Now the other thing you can do is cut individual petals. So if your ribbon's not quite big enough, so nobody's going to see the middle, you could cut out individual petals and then just glue these one on top of the other to peek out like this. That's what I'm going to do for this one. And now our flower looks something a little more like that. Pretty cool, huh? Now you can do the same thing on this top layer here and shape the petals so it's not quite so flat, so that it reveals a little bit more of this layer underneath. And that's what I'm going to do. Now, you may not have thought about it. If you don't have the right colour ribbon, but you do have a pale colour ribbon, you can dye this. Just use any one of your permanent ink pads and ink the front and the back of the ribbon. It's a little bit fiddly, and put some paper underneath your work surface and give it time to dry. It's the easiest way to make the right colour ribbon. If your ribbon isn't polyester, if it's cotton, you could of course spray it with a dye ink spray. You know, I love the ones from Lindy's. You also get a bit of sparkle on those and make it something a little bit extra special. Now all I really need to do is glue my layers back together on this for my beautiful custom flower. Now if you're after a nice pale simple vintage flower, just glue the layers together just like this. But I'd like something a little bit darker, so I'm going to use my Lindy's Stamp Gang Golden Doubloons, and this is a Moonshadow Mist, so it's got a sepia tone to it. Make sure that you spritz the flowers so that the colour is beautiful and even, and this one has a beautiful golden shimmer in there, so I'm going to get some bling as well as the sepia tones. Dry the layers of petals with a heat gun. You'll find this also helps stiffen them for some reason. If any of the petals have gone out of shape, just use your fingers and bend them back into shape. You'll know when they dry because they start to blow away. You can actually hear that the paper has changed and has become more crinkly. So a little dab of glossy accents to hold each of the layers firmly together, and then use some scissors or something just to squish all of those center points together so it makes nice firm contact and your flower holds together well. Even as it is, have a look at that. Isn't that so different from where we started? So I've taken, admittedly, a beautiful cream Prima paper flower, but then just made it something that will work for my project. But in using the same colors as the original, so those beautiful golden bronzy colors, I've got something that's custom but gorgeous. Now our red flower looks fantastic just as it is. It's quite subtle and lovely, but I'm going for something with more of a Christmas feel, and I want to bring on the bling. So I'm just going to add 2 layers of beautiful sparkly sprays to my flower to colour the paper. I'm going to use Glitz Spritz in Medieval Gold from Lindy's Stamp Gang and spray that on first. And this will add a lovely layer of golden shimmer. Now to make sure it's also lovely and dark, I'm adding a layer of Autumn Maple Crimson, but I'm not spraying the entire flower. Then add a little bit more of the Glitz Spritz on top so you get a really beautiful two-toned shimmer. Dry with the heat gun, and then carefully use glossy accents to put all of those petal layers together. Now this one's a little bit more difficult because it's got all of those individual petals, but just layer them one on top of each other and you will have the most stunning flower by the time you... Once the glue's dried, your flowers can now be finished if you'd like to leave them like this. I think you'll agree that looks just so vintagely gorgeous. So pretty. So you could totally just leave it there. The red one as well. So subtle, so pretty, and those little layers of ribbon are just extraordinarily cute. But I'd like to bling it up a bit, so I'm going to show you 2 ways. The first, I'm going to use the Platinum Stickles on my vintage flower for a little bit of subtle bling. So this is the same colours I've been using as the rest of the flower, and I'm just going to add the tiniest little bit around the top layer and the third layer, just to add a hint of glitter and to help pick those layers out visually. Now, if you don't like mega bling, look away now, because I'm about to absolutely bling up this red flower. Now I want to use it for a Christmas project, so I'm going to start by adding some Gala Glitz in gold. This has little beads, crystal shards and things. And then I'm going to add some Twinklets diamond dust to the edges of the petals so that it kind of looks a little bit like snow or ice crystals. This has the effect of making it mega blingy. So it's going to turn this flower from subtle to pow. So watch this. I think we can all agree this has now got mega bling. And aren't they so very different from where we started? So these are my upcycled Prima paper flowers. You could of course use any brand. And we've got one that's sort of a bit more subtle and one that's mega bling. Now you wouldn't want to have too many of these really blingy flowers on the one project because it is going to take over. This is a lot more subtle. You could easily use this, but that would need to be a single flower and probably the centerpiece of the project. So I might make a Christmas card with that one. Now just so you can see how these look on an actual project, this is the similar kind of flower I've made using a slightly flatter flower from Prima. I've used the ribbon layers between, and I've used my Delicata gold and silver ink pads to change the colours of the ribbon. And you can see this is lovely and subtle. Now this is the only flower I've used on this project, and because of all those extra layers, that's really all that it needed. So if you'd like to alter your Prima flowers, give these ideas a go. Try vintage papers, scrapbooking papers, ribbons, materials, burlap, anything you can get your hands on, and make your own customized versions. You won't regret it, they're heaps of fun.
If you enjoyed this video, I'd love you to give me a like, and if you'd like to see more from Sparkle Tart, subscribe to my YouTube channel. There's a product list below the video in the description, and you can connect with me via YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, or Google+. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.